Okay, in this segment, we're going to start expanding out into, more detailed sexual behavior, condom use. So, again, I'm relying on the National Survey of Sexual Health and Behavior from 2010, and they asked the 14 to 17-year-old respondents whether they used a condom during their last sexual encounter. 79% of the males and 58% of the females reported that they had used a condom at their last sexual encounter. I'm not sure that they really did, because if you look at this data, here we have 2013 in the darker blue bars, and we have 2017 in the green bars. And what we see is numbers that are lower than that being reported in 2013 and 2017. Males tend to over-report probably whether they used a condom or not. The female data might be a little bit more reliable as far as whether that really happened or not. And this gets to something that I really want to drive home about teenagers and sex education in general, or sexual awareness in general. When they're just sort of in their normal state of mind and everything, they know what the right answers are. They know what they should or shouldn't be doing, and what could be harmful, or they know how pregnancy occurs, and like they know these things, and they can pass a test on these things, and they can show that they know these things. But then you get them into the situation, and heart rates are up, and everything's going so fast, and they're relying on their limbic system instead of their cerebral cortex to make decisions. And suddenly all the things that they know are not going to have an impact on how they behave in the moment. And so if you have a situation where, things are starting to move towards sexual intercourse and there's no condom available, that is not a guarantee that a teenager with good sex education under their belt is going to say, oh no, we need to stop. Unless we have a condom, we can't be doing this. It's in the real world, in the scenario, the decision isn't necessarily made at the cognitive level. It's made more at the emotional sort of, what we use our reptilian brain, our lower, less evolved part of our brain when we're making decisions in the heat of the moment. And so condom use is down. It has been going down over the past, so I have this 2010 survey where they, 79% of males and 58% of females say this. By 2013, 73% of the males, if we average across the three races that are listed here, we're looking at probably somewhere around 67% of the males are saying that they used condoms in 2013. So that's already a, 10-point drop at least. And then by 2017, we're averaging out at more like 60% of males are saying that they are. So condom use is probably going down. Like, it honestly is probably going down. Plus, I think we're probably seeing some over-reporting on top of that. So I think some males are saying that they're using condoms when they're not really using condoms, because they know it's the right thing to say that they did. They know they should have used a condom, but they didn't. And so that's a troubling trend, because remember in the last segment, I had been talking about how the pregnancy rate has been coming down. And part of the reason why it might have been coming down is because everybody, people were more open to the idea of using condoms. And for a while there, high school kids were very diligently reporting using condoms. And so we're really starting to see a decline on that. Adolescent rates of any kind of STI are low. About 10% of females and about 3% of males have some kind of sexually transmitted infection. Okay, so notice the disparity in those numbers. These are adolescent females and adolescent males. So why are females like 3 times as likely to have had any type of STI? And this is our first glimpse into something that we'll notice when we talk about STIs, the biological unfairness of how STIs are contracted. They tend to be contracted through the mucous membranes, and they tend to be carried in bodily fluids. And so when bodily fluids containing an infection are deposited into mucous membranes, they can be absorbed and brought into the bloodstream. And so it's much more likely that a female would contract an STI from a male than it is in the reverse. And it's just how it is. Now this graphic, it takes us all the way up to 24-year-olds. So this isn't entirely just adolescents, but 15 to 24-year-olds account for half of all new STD infections. So that's a lot. That's a narrow range, and a range that includes a lot of people who haven't even started having sex yet. And so it's, a subpopulation, very small portion of the population that's accounting for half of all the new STD infections. So clearly they're not using their condoms as much as they should, or they're not realizing that oral sex can cause STDs, things like that. So they're engaging in risky behaviors. All right, so here we have the same basic chart I showed you earlier, but it's zoomed out a little bit. So now we're going all the way back to 1957. And then it's also broken it up by race. So this is the rate per 1,000 females aged 15 to 19 of births. So this is only those pregnancies that result in births. And so we do see some racial differences for one thing, right? We see that on average, the blue line, which is non-Hispanic blacks, and then the orange line, which is Hispanic, tend to be higher than the green squares, which are the non-Hispanic white. And then the black line going through the middle there that starts as far back as 1957 or 8 is the line that is just the average of women. So they weren't breaking it up by race then. So what you can see is that for all groups across time, all along, we're seeing this decline in birth rates. So among the 15 to 19-year-olds. Something I'd like to throw into the mix in 1957 to 1973, it wasn't that uncommon for women to get married at 18 or 19 years old and have kids, in marriage while they were still within this age range that's being called teenage pregnancies. And I think we can all agree that that's probably a different situation than what we're really worried about or talking about, right? That's a whole other sociological issue about getting married young or whatever. But, when we're talking about birth rates among females between the ages of 15 and 19, I think we're all tending to think of, unmarried, unplanned, undesired, hadn't been their dream kind of situation. The good news that we're seeing is that, the two racial groups who had the highest birth rates in 1989, they really have shown really significant decline. Till by the time we're at 2013, there's not much difference among the races as far as birth rates. So that's good for the 15 to 19-year-olds who are experiencing unplanned pregnancies. It's become much more rare. Now, here we have a nice chart that's comparing teen birth rate by country. This is all from 2007. And so you see that the United Kingdom, which includes England and Scotland and like that, they have the highest rate at 26.7 teenage pregnancies per 1,000 girls in the age range of 15 to 19. Then there's a nice drop off where we get down to Australia, where it's 15.9, and Canada at 13.3, and Spain at 13.2. And then we have kind of another little cluster there of Greece, France, Germany, and Norway, who are between 9 and about 11. And then we have another drop off, Italy, Netherlands, Japan, Switzerland, where we're, looking at 4 to 7. So really a lot lower rates among, I think we could probably say France and below. Absolutely, we could say Netherlands to Switzerland, much lower rates. Just FYI, we're number one. We were talking about how much we've been dropping off and stuff, and we're really happy with how we've dropped off, but we're still, way above the other industrialized countries. And so a lot of times people look at things like our sex education or our access to birth control or other kinds of things. So I thought it would be useful to look at this comparison between, now remember, so I've got Sweden, France, Canada, Great Britain. Sweden, France, so Sweden is not on this one. France is here and it's 10.3. Canada, 13.3. United Kingdom, 26.7. So in the blue bar, the dark blue bar, we see people reporting that they did not use contraception the first time they had intercourse. And you'll notice that there's really no difference among Sweden, Canada, Great Britain, and the USA with regard to that. I mean, Canada and USA are identical. Sweden and Great Britain are a little lower, but not noticeably. France is noticeably lower. It's much more likely in France that at first intercourse, contraception is used. What is interesting, though, is that even though Sweden, Canada, Great Britain, and the US have very similar rates of failure to use contraception at first intercourse, they have vastly different baby before age 20 bars, which is the light blue bar. So the US has a baby before age 20 bar that's almost as tall as the no contraception at first intercourse bar, whereas the others significantly lower. So you have to wonder, how are you Swedes, Canadians, and Great Brits having intercourse without contraception, at least at your first intercourse, and yet not necessarily ending up with a baby before age 20? How's that happening? Well, this chart might help to explain some of that, because this shows how pregnancies ended up. And so the dark orange part of the bar is that it ended in abortion. The lightest pink bar, whatever you call that, peach colored bar, that would be those that ended in birth. And then the medium range color there that's on the far right, that's describing the percentage that ends in miscarriage. And so you've got the US on top because we're number one, and Switzerland at the very bottom, right? Let's look at Sweden. It's about mid-range there, has an asterisk next to it because it's actually from 2010 instead of the 2011 like everybody else. So Sweden, notice that it has 20 abortions per 1,000 women between the ages of 15 and 19, whereas the U.S. is down at 15. So it's not, like a night and day, but it's more likely that an unplanned pregnancy in Sweden would end in abortion. Same thing with England and Wales. It's 20 also. So what was my other? So France was the other group that we looked at on the, didn't have contraception, baby before 20 chart. France has, 15 per 1,000 women, same as the U.S., having abortions. So French women are more likely to have contraception at their first intercourse, and they're just as likely as an American woman to end in abortion. So even though they have a lower likelihood of becoming pregnant by accident, they're having the same rate of abortion. So these are things to think about. It's not always as simple as, wow, fewer women in Sweden have unplanned babies. It's not quite the same. They may have higher abortion rates. I was talking to some camp counselors that my daughter knew from when she was in college. They were from the Netherlands, which I'm trying to look and see. The Netherlands is down way low at the bottom there. See, the Netherlands is like third from the bottom. And I said to them, they were 18 to 20 years old, somewhere in that range. There were 3 of them. And I said, I've been teaching human sexuality a really long time. I've always wanted to go to the Netherlands and actually study this stuff myself, but I haven't had the chance to do it. So can you please be my N of 3 study and give me your opinion on why the unplanned pregnancy rate among teenage girls in the Netherlands is so much lower than the teenage pregnancy rate in the U.S. And they said that there is a giant stigma associated with becoming pregnant as a teenager, that they do have comprehensive sex education, they do have access to free birth control, and if you become pregnant, if you have an unplanned pregnancy, everybody acts as though you must be really dumb, is what they told me. That how could you have gotten pregnant when everything has been, provided so that this wouldn't happen? And so they said the stigma is ginormous. And if you look at the ratio of pregnancies and how they work out, half of unplanned pregnancies in the Netherlands end in abortion. So if a girl were to become pregnant, she knows first off, she's going to be judged, and second off, probably encouraged to have an abortion. And so for them, they said it was very motivating to make sure to avoid pregnancy through, and they use a lot of permanent or very long-term birth control over there. So they have IUDs available and things like that. So it makes it much less likely that they would actually become pregnant. And so their explanation added a little bit of a layer for me that had not really been clear to me, because we have access to birth control. We have access to information. We have all the things that a person would actually need to do to help them to prevent a pregnancy. And so what's the part that's missing? Like what's different for us in the US? And part of what's different is we have removed a lot of the stigma about being pregnant. And then we have on the flip side of it, this sort of stigma about knowing for sure that you're planning on having sex. Like actually saying to yourself, I think I see where this relationship is going, and I want to make sure that I'm prepared for my first intercourse. For the average teenage American girl, she had until the age of 16. Girls who start having sex prior to that, they will typically go at least a year with unprotected sex before they acknowledge that they are sexually active and that they need birth control. If the girl doesn't start having sex until she's at least 16, then it may be a shorter duration. Like once they turn 16, it seems like on average girls are more likely to acknowledge that this could end in pregnancy. I don't want that. And they take steps to make sure that that doesn't happen. So it's another argument in favor of trying to delay the onset of first intercourse, that the girl might be a little older and able to make better judgments about protecting herself. There's multi-layers to the teenage birth rate that we see in the U.S. or pregnancy rate that we see in the U.S. There's lots of factors, and there is never one simple thing that would change this outcome. Now, we're talking about this pretty seriously, but what's wrong with teenage pregnancy? Really, what's the difference? I'll tell you a big secret, which is that the healthiest time for women to have babies is about age 17 to about age 32. Those are like the healthiest years, the times when you're least likely to have birth complications. The lowest mortality rate and stuff typically happens. So it can't be, biological that we're concerned about teenage pregnancy unless we're talking about significantly younger girls. Below 17 and a half-ish or something, you're looking at a not fully mature reproductive tract and things like that. So it's not healthy for younger adolescent girls. But really, aside from biology, what else could be the problem? Well, one major problem is that because there is still carried in us this stigma about being a teenage mother and things like that, a lot of times girls just do not want to admit that they might be pregnant. And so they try and go on as if everything's normal. And, for the first trimester, they oftentimes are in complete denial at all that they're pregnant. They don't change anything about their behavior. So they're still, going to cheerleading practice or things like that. They may not be eating well, and they definitely are not telling a doctor and having any kind of prenatal care. And so if there is something that, let's say maybe the doctor might say to them, you need to be taking these prenatal vitamins to help ensure that your baby doesn't develop spina bifida. That conversation is not going to happen if you're not going to see the doctor in the first trimester. Another risk with teenage pregnancy is that it kind of sets the offspring up for thinking that this is like how old you are when you have kids. So they have found that daughters of teenage mothers are 3 times more likely to become teenage mothers themselves compared to, kids whose moms were at least 20 when they had them. It becomes sort of, and it is really a weird thing how as a kid we will, as a late teenager, we will justify our behaviors by saying, well, it worked out fine for you. looking at your parents, and you have no concept that the first 15 years of your life, your parents were really struggling and it was really hard. And had they only waited, it would have been, a lot easier, whatever. We don't see that as kids. And so we're like, I know I said it to my mom. I got married when I was 20 years old, and good news, I'm still married. But when I got married at 20, my mom said, I think you guys are too young. And I'm like, I'm a year older than you were when you got married. And I was like, what are you talking about? It worked for you. And did work for her. I mean, my mom also had a very successful and long lasting and happy marriage, but I said it to my mom. You're my role model. I'm going to get married young like you did. Right. And, I have to say my daughter felt very virtuous because she waited till she was 23 to get married, like such an old maid. Right. Because my mom and I were, even though we're, old, and it doesn't apply, sort of the role models. Right. And that's what I think we all do. And so if a child has a mom that is only, 17 or 18 years older than them, they kind of internalize that moms are 17 or 18 years older than their children, and they sort of internalize it. And I'm not saying they do it on purpose. I've been having a conversation with somebody who takes everything I say very literally all the time. And I don't mean that they're saying, oh gosh, I am going to do what my mom did because that seems like the way to go. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that it gives them an explanation for their behavior. It makes it okay, right? And it's not the world. It's not the end of the world to have a teenage mom. It's not the end of the world to be a teenage mom. It's the harder route that a person can take. And so that's what we're talking about here. Part of what makes it a harder route is that only 38% of teenage girls who have a child before the age of 18 will end up with their high school diploma. I mean, that is a significant achievement. If a girl has a baby when she's still in high school, it's a significant achievement that she ever gets her high school diploma. Now if we added in GEDs, we might get a slightly larger number than this, but we all know, and those of us who might have a GED can attest that it is looked at a little bit askance. It's like, oh, what happened that you needed a GED instead of a diploma? Like having a diploma is sort of the sign that you made it through. And so it is difficult. It's a harder road when you have a child while you're still a teenager. So how about a little bit more detail on what makes it difficult? Okay, so let's talk about this. Marriages are less stable. Sometimes when a girl becomes pregnant, she will marry the father of her baby. And they're both young, and they are getting married because they're pregnant and not because they were really ready or because they were really convinced that this was their long-term life partner. Sometimes they're getting married because there's a lot of pressure from the parents, a variety of things. So we have that group that get married when they're pregnant or soon after that, while they're still really super young and for not, clear-eyed reasons. We have on the other side, those who maybe had done that and got divorced and now are looking to remarry, or never married the father of their child and are looking to get married for the first time. So in this second group, we have a person who was very young when they had a child. They now have a child that they're responsible for, and they're getting married for the first time or potentially second time. They are bringing with them all the things that can make any marriage less stable, which is a very clear history in the form of their child that they're bringing with them. There can be conflict coming from the fact that the father, the husband that they're marrying is not the father of the child. So there's sort of, this is my child and I'll discipline them the way I want, or other kinds of things like that can be a source of conflict in the couple. There are a lot of factors that can go into that makes it less stable. But either way, whether you marry young to marry the father of the child because of the pregnancy, or you're getting married later with a child from a previous relationship, it's just there. In those situations, there's just a lot of opportunity for discord, for disagreement, for arguments and things that would pull the couple apart. It just makes the marriages less stable. There are health risks for very young moms. There are health risks for the baby that are associated with having a mom who hasn't maybe taken care of herself throughout the pregnancy because of denial or low income or a variety of different things. On average, there are going to be socioeconomic repercussions from having children when we're really young, because we may not, like I said, get a high school diploma. People who don't have a high school diploma earn, like $1 million over their lifetime less than people who have a high school diploma. I mean, it's an enormous disparity in the income that a person can earn when they just have that one additional thing, the high school diploma. Some moms who become pregnant are cast out by their families, and they now are on their own taking care of their child. Sometimes once they graduate high school, now they're cast out and they have to take care of their child on their own, different kinds of things. If they did marry the father of their child, post-divorce, there's always socioeconomic repercussions, the drop in status and things like that. So one thing I wanted to say about the socioeconomic repercussions is that on average, teenage fathers are more likely to make their child their child care kinds of payments to the mother of their child than divorced dads are. And one argument for why that happens is that the father of a teenage girl's baby recognizes that he made this baby and that it needs to be taken care of, and maybe doesn't hold as many things against the mom. Whereas in the case of divorce, a lot of times there's this, I don't like the mom of my children anymore, and she's just going to use my money, and a lot of these other kind of resentment issues that can make divorced dads be less likely to want to pay their child support. So that's kind of an interesting side note having to do with socioeconomic issues. A lot of times the parents of the dad will help to pay the child support and things because they recognize their responsibility in it too. So everybody sort of gets impacted. All right. I wanted to wrap up this conversation with some data from Washington State. So we ranked number 13 in our teen birth rate. We ranked number 17 in our teen pregnancy rate. We don't have the data on our unplanned pregnancy rate. So back in 2010, there were just over 11,000 teenage pregnancies among girls 15 to 19, which works out to 49 pregnancies per 1,000 girls. So we're right about on track with the rest of, like the average for the nation. It has been going down. You see that it's 18% less than it had been just 2 years before this data was provided, and 55% lower than the peak 1988 year. When we look at the number of actual teen moms giving birth, it's almost 4,100 births in 2014. And then the state spent $124 million on things related to teenage moms having their babies and the early months right after that. In 2014, there were 19.1 births per 1,000 girls. Now, we can't extrapolate this out to how many pregnancies there were, but 19.1 per 1,000 girls in the 15 to 19 range, which is a 7% drop from what it had been in 2013, and it's a 64% drop from the peak year of 1991 for Washington State. So we've made a lot of headway in Washington State, but I think these numbers are still pretty high, right? 19 girls per 1,000. Now that's per 1,000, so that's like not quite 2 girls per 100. But it's, it's an issue. And a lot of times people will look in Washington State and they'll maybe be living in one of the more populous parts of the state, and they'll say, oh, well, it's probably a bigger problem in the countryside or among the rural counties and things like that. Per capita, it is, but it's, teenage pregnancy is an issue in all circumstances, in all walks of life, and in all socioeconomic classes. I mean, it's something that happens across the board. All right. Well, that should conclude adolescence. I will see you back here for a discussion of young adulthood.